My name is Naomi Howard, and today I will be presenting my capstone on spatial coastal monitoring for climate resilience, a case study of Oceanside, California. Just before diving into the presentation, here is my capstone agenda. I will be first talking about the significance of coastal dunes as a nature-based solution and their value to Oceanside. Second, I will address some gaps in coastal monitoring I encountered throughout my project. Third, I will go on to discuss the existing frameworks for coastal dune monitoring and experimentation with the new survey methodology applied. And finally, I will present my preliminary findings from this research and what I believe its future implications are for the city of Oceanside and for coastal adaptation. To start off, I would like to introduce coastal dunes as a nature-based system. As defined by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, also known as the ICUN, nature-based solutions are a pathway for both mitigation and adaptation for climate action in order to achieve both reductions in warming and overall resiliency as a planet, outlined in several climate change agreements like the Paris Agreement. Living shorelines serve as an entire nature-based solution ecosystem, providing adaptation and resilience to the coastal communities living behind them, while also maintaining the natural integrity of the shoreline and the biodiversity that inhabits it. The restoration of living shorelines has become widely adopted by coastal communities across the globe, slowly taking over gray infrastructure strategies such as retaining walls, groins, and jetties that cause harsh separations between the shoreline and the ocean. There are three important objectives to fulfill when trying to restore living shorelines. One is improve coastal and climate resiliency. Two, protect upland areas and coastal infrastructure. And three, maintain shoreline ecological function. Coastal dunes are formed on the back portion of a living shoreline, also referred to as the upper beach. The high elevation of these dunes, compared to the rest of the lower coastline, serve as a protective barrier against high wave activity while providing habitat. Coastal dune restoration projects are gaining momentum across California as sea level rise projections become increasingly urgent. Senate Bill 272, passed in 2023, strengthens the authority of coastal communities to act on these projections by requiring local coastal governments to develop and implement sea level rise adaptation plans, which is giving cities a formal mandate to pursue nature-based solutions. Policymakers are now actively evaluating which coastal adaptation projects are best address the hazards associated with rising seas, and dune restoration has reemerged as a leading strategy. Several coastal cities in California, like Santa Monica, have already begun investing in dune restoration along their coastlines, reflecting a broader statewide recognition that rebuilt dunes are among the most effective and cost-efficient tools available for long-term coastal resilience. Coastal dunes are a relatively easy strategy to implement. Wind will blow onto the sand and onto the back beaches, accumulating into mounds over time. This sand is able to stay in place from rooted vegetation, which increases overall dune stability and accelerates the sand retention rates. When storm surges, coastal floods, and mean water lines swallow the entire shoreline, the dunes are eroded instead of the infrastructure behind it, bringing sand further down onto the beach. Therefore, coastal dunes are not only a protective barrier, but a natural sediment deposit for the rest of the beach. It is estimated that up to 75% of California's beaches will be lost by 2100. Oceanside is already experiencing these significant changes in beach loss, where up to 6.6 feet of sand is lost each year along the city's beaches. This is largely due to the construction of Oceanside's harbor at the north end of the city, which has amplified erosion along Oceanside's shoreline to the south of its placement. To combat this erosion, the city has invested in annual nourishment projects to keep sand on the beach. However, beach loss still occurs every year despite this. Coastal dune restoration is one of the pathways the city is exploring to resolve these devastating beach loss impacts. The project was chosen for three main reasons. The first is coastal dunes have been historically existing in Oceanside pre-harbor construction, as shown in this photograph taken in the 1880s on the far left. Second, coastal dunes act as a natural windbreak, physically intercepting and trapping sand before it can migrate off the beach and into the city's parking lots and roadways. Third, the addition of coastal dunes in the city of Oceanside has the potential to mitigate coastal floods and coastal storm surges, like the example shown here in 2015 on the right. This depicts large waves overflowing onto the Strand, a popular beach site for both its residents and visiting tourists throughout the year. To briefly give you all a full understanding of the Coastal Dune Project, this is a map of North Oceanside. Here you can see the harbor beach and its associated jetties, the San Luis River mouth, and the Strand Beach, just north of the Oceanside Pier. The blue areas is where coastal dunes used to be in the 1880s. Pre-harbor construction continued to extend north and south of this map. The purple segments are where the coastal dune projects are currently placed to restore these lost areas in Oceanside. And this map is intended to show the extent of natural shoreline that has been lost due to the construction of coastal infrastructure, causing coastal dunes to disappear, along with the numerous ecosystem services that they provide. In order to monitor the city of Oceanside, I was hired as an intern to conduct weekly surveys of the 9 different dune sites installed in northern Oceanside. At each site, I would record dunes related to qualitative and quantitative observations, as well as perform any additional routine maintenance necessary, such as picking up trash and fixing shims. I wanted to incorporate Oceanside's dune restoration project into my master's capstone for several reasons. Oceanside beach loss is not universally understood, and its community expresses a lot of concern, but little action has been taken to adapt beyond annual dredging projects. Therefore, in order to increase sand retention in Oceanside's beaches, nature-based solutions are necessary to provide immediate beach resilience benefits, as reflected in projects such as Ponto Beach, Cardiff, and Santa Monica as dune pilot study examples. Basing off of this sentiment, the city has just started moving forward with its first green and blue coastal management projects, creating an immediate and growing need for robust monitoring and adaptation data to track their effectiveness. This creates a direct opportunity for me to step in at a crucial moment, contributing to a restoration project that is not only the first of its kind for Oceanside, but one that will set the precedent of how future coastal adaptation efforts are measured and evaluated here in the city and the state of California. The city of Oceanside gave me a qualitative coastal monitoring framework to follow each week as I visited the dune restoration sites. I was asked to record daily metadata, tidal cycles, and the overall success of each dune installation, including dune topography, native vegetation, non-native vegetation, sand retention, human intrusion, and the overall dune height of each of the 9 sites. The image on the right is an example of an observation form that I used to record information for all of these categories. These criteria are used to evaluate the overall performance of the restoration project and are due to be delivered in a brief annual report for the next 3 to 4 years to key stakeholders throughout the duration of the pilot study. While I found that this framework was helpful, I realized that it was not telling the full story, especially in the categories I have asterisks on the left image. This is because I had no way of quantifying these changes, including how much sand was actually accumulating, where topography changes were actually happening, and how high the dunes were actually growing week to week in each study area. Once I started to explore how dune morphology and shoreline changes were quantified and calculated in similar coastal projects, I ran into even more challenges. One barrier is that there are incredible technologies, such as truck-mounted LiDAR and drone surveys, that are able to detect shifts in beach topographies, but these are costly and are usually deployed on a biannual or annual basis to assess seasonal shoreline changes. These technologies are not ideal for site-specific coastal projects, as infrequent seasonal surveying does not tell the full story of early dune formation. Another significant barrier to monitoring coastal dune projects is that they rarely exist as a single uniform site. While some stationary survey technologies can repeatedly capture data at one fixed location, this dune project spans multiple distinct installations, and each one is telling a different story in terms of elevation change, vegetation establishment, and sediment behavior. I also found that coastal monitoring data rarely makes it into climate adaptation planning. This beach profile was taken from Save Oceanside Sand on the right, a nonprofit specifically run to identify Oceanside's beach loss. This group has produced over a decade of monthly transects rigorously analyzed by Scripps researchers, yet it rarely reaches the local governments who are responsible for implementing these coastal adaptation projects. Once the coastal project is in place, the data is outsourced, creating a disconnect between what is happening in the field versus what is being analyzed. So the solution for this is my project aims to help close that gap by making monitoring data more actionable for the decision makers on the ground, while providing a low cost and low barrier tool to measuring and quantifying dune change over time. To achieve this, I created a spatial monitoring technique using Oceanside and La Jolla as my 2 sites of study. I coupled my iPhone 17 with a highly accurate coordinate system receiver device called a Vidoc to take photos and points to capture and replicate each dune site, which I'll expand on in the next slide. Please note that the phone itself is not shown in this setup, as I need it to take this photo. Phones are equipped with high-quality cameras when coupled with high-resolution point detection. You can evaluate even the smallest changes in topography and sand accumulations with these. These images are captured in a 3D modeling application called Pix4D Catch, which is free to use. I believe that this technology, if successful, would address several challenges I just discussed by creating a frequent survey tool that is not stationary or expensive to set up and use, would be quantifying dynamic coastal variables that cannot accurately account for that are not right now quantified in qualitative measurements, and serve as a low barrier and low cost technology that can be adopted outside of research institutions, since there is no licensing or certification required, which would be creating an opportunity for citizen science and potential partnerships with outside organizations interested in coastal work. The technology uses three main components to successfully measure spatial changes. Ground control points are a physical marker placed on the ground at known surveyed locations before you've been capturing imagery. They act as anchors that tie your points to real-world coordinates. Real-time kinematic is basically a refined GPS system. Normally, GPS has an accuracy of several meters, too imprecise for detailed survey work. RTK fixes this by using a second stationary GPS receiver as a reference point. By constantly comparing signals between the iPhone and the fixed receiver, RTK corrects positioning errors in real time, where every photo you take is tagged with a highly precise location. Once the images are processed, Pix4D generates a point cloud, which is also called a dense collection of millions of individual 3D coordinates that together represent the surface of the landscape. From the point cloud, you can extract different data sets, including elevation data, measuring fore-dune and back-dune volumes, and overall shifts in topographic landscape, and much more. The surveys that were successfully captured show considerable promise for this methodology. When compared against beach spatial surveys, including truck-mounted LiDAR, stationary LiDAR, and RTK transects, the iPhone and ViDoc pairing produced point cloud data within centimeter-level accuracies. To put that into more digestible terms, every individual point generated by the iPhone and ViDoc fell within a few centimeters of readings produced by technologies that cost at least twice as much. This figure demonstrates this with a comparison of cross-sectional elevation profiles across 4 survey plots along Harbor Drive and Oceanside, overlaying 2026 survey data against March 2026 truck LiDAR data baselines. And these two data sets show centimeter scale differences in elevation readings between established truck LiDAR surveying and the handheld survey methodology, which is visible in the subtle vertical offsets between the blue and red dashed lines across all 4 plots. I have to say that several of the handheld surveys I took were often heavily misaligned compared to the surveying technologies currently established and required lots of edits in capturing technologies, coordinate system aligning, and more. However, handheld survey outputs were significantly improved by implementing ground control points that created better positioning and alignment across the surveys. And finally, more surveys must be captured by the handheld survey methodology before confident quantifications of mean dune change can be made, as a mean error and coordinate offset must be determined with a larger sample size, as figures like these revealed mysterious offsets that need to be further investigated. From completing the dune observation forms, technical assessments with the iPhone and ViDoc, and given maintenance materials, here's a summary of what I observed during my weekly observations. All right, dunes were first installed in the last few weeks of January. Each dune plot installation included 2 rows of back fence line and upfront areas with wooden shims. Native vegetation taken from Camp Pendleton and San Luis Rey nearby were dispersed across each installation to root in the sand. At the end of February, high winds and rain led to significant changes in dunes topography, where plants were buried with sand and the sand accumulation was significantly higher around the fence line and shim areas. In the middle of March, new growth was observed in all 8 of the installed plots and are now starting to establish in all dune areas. Starting in April, significant changes were made due to overlap in the coastal dune restoration site plans and the area for the annual harbor dredging conducted by Army Corps. This resulted in an entire plot removed that was closest to the harbor beach jetty and the front areas of each of the 4 dune sites on the strand, with only the back line fencing remaining. In May, the dredging equipment has been removed, and spring winds are starting to bring more sand into the plots and onto vegetation. With new plant growth and flowering, along with sites displaying more dune topography, the public has also shown increased interest in this project as well. And there will be more observations to come in June. From my work in the field and my discussions in the coastal adaptation space over the past few months, I believe that the iPhone and RTK surveys should be explored as a low-cost and low barrier to entry coastal monitoring technique, for cities, nonprofits, and the general public to pursue and learn how to quantify changes in these coastal projects that aim to protect the public at a higher level. With the incorporation of new technology such as this one in the coastal monitoring space, I hope to guide future adaptation efforts where we can identify ways of defining success of coastal adaptation projects on site-specific basis while continuing to the development of performance measures for them. Specifically, coastal dunes need these metrics to define success in reference to sea level rise adaptation plans and coastal hazard assessments, since it is recognized as a viable adaptation pathway but lacks standards to determine the exact magnitude of shoreline improvements these projects provide. Overall communication and community engagement will be imperative for the ongoing success of the Coastal Dune Project. We have the tools and examples to create successful dune projects across California. We just need to provide and implement spatial technologies to monitor them, as these projects are crucial to the success of climate adaptation strategies in coastal California communities. I want to end by thanking my capstone committee members, Mark Merrifield, Jamie Timberlake, and Jenna Wisniewski, and Rob Grensbeck for their incredible support on this project and in the coastal adaptation space. I also want to thank my wonderful cohort, as well as Dr. Corey Gabriel and Jada Ryan for making this program such an amazing experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Naomi. It was just super interesting. I know mostly from you talking about this that you have experienced like people like coming through and like not understanding what's happening with the restoration projects and that leading to it getting torn apart or walked on and all kinds of stuff. How do you see this technology like addressing that issue in terms of, you know, just letting people know what's going on? Do you think this technology will make that easier?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I think yes and no in a way. Like, as so many presentations touched on earlier, education is kind of the root of all of these motivations, and making sure that these people understand that climate adaptation is a crucial part of adapting our cities, even if it involves a fence line and by your property. But I think also the spatial technology would be a really cool way to engage people. And I mean, I had a few discussions when I was even out there being like, look what I'm doing. I'm like tracking I'm making a whole 3D model of what's happening, because it's important to like measure these changes over time. And just introducing this as an exciting point of that dunes are a dynamic system that just are really cool to measure. Like, they migrate, they change, and they've been really successful, and they're pretty. So I think that there's a lot of potential there. Yeah.